I thought planting acorns was a hobby much like collecting stamps, and had forgotten about it. After demobilization, I found myself the possessor of a small gratuity and a great desire to breathe pure air. That was my one objective as I set off once more on the road to the barren lands. The country had not changed, but in the distance, beyond the deserted village, I noticed a sort of greyish mist that lay on the hilltops like a carpet. The shepherd who planted trees had been on my mind since the day before. 10,000 oak trees, I thought to myself, really need a great deal of space. I had seen so many people die in those 5 years, it was easy to imagine that Elzéar Bouffier too was dead. Especially since at 20 we think men of 50 are ancient, with nothing left to do but die. He was not dead. In fact, he was more vigorous than ever. He had changed his occupation. He had kept only 4 sheep, but he now possessed over 100 hives of bees. He told me, and I could see for myself, that the war had not disturbed him, and he had continued his planting, unperturbed. The oaks of 1910 were now 10 years old and taller than either of us. It was such an impressive sight that I was struck dumb, and as he never spoke, we spent the whole day in silence, walking through his forest. It was in 3 sections, and measured 11 kilometers long and 3 kilometers at its widest. When I reminded myself that all this was the work of the hand and soul of this one man with no mechanical help, it seemed to me that, after all, men might be as effective as God in tasks other than destruction. He had followed his dream, and beech trees as high as my shoulder, stretching as far as the eye could see, were witness to it. The oaks were dense and strong enough to no longer be at the mercy of rodents. Indeed, had Providence herself planned to destroy this man's creation, she would from now on have had to resort to cyclones. He showed me handsome groves of 5-year-old birches planted in 1915, the year I was fighting at the Battle of Verdun. They were set out in all the hollows where he had guessed, and rightly, there was moisture near the surface. They were like adolescents, tender yet sturdy and confident. Nature, in turn, had just followed her natural cycle. He did not worry about it. Steadfastly, he had gone about his simple task. On the way down through the village, I saw water flowing in streams which in living memory had always been dry. This was truly the most impressive example of nature's regenerative powers that I had ever seen. A long time ago, these brooks had been full of water. Among the miserable villages I mentioned before, some were built on sites of ancient Roman settlements, and archaeologists digging in the ruins had found fishhooks where in the 20th century drought had made it necessary to use cisterns to ensure even a modest supply of water. The wind, too, had scattered seeds abroad, and as the water reappeared, so did willow trees, reeds, meadows, gardens, flowers, and a reason for living. Change had come about so gradually that it was simply taken for granted. Of course, hunters who climbed these heights in search of hares or wild boar had noticed the abundant growth of little trees, but had put it down to some caprice of nature. That is why no one meddled with the work of the shepherd. If they had suspected it was man's work, they would have interfered. But who would even think of him? Who in the villages or among the authorities could ever have imagined such constant, magnificent generosity? Each year from 1920 on, I paid a visit to Elzéar Bouffier. I never saw him lose heart, nor was he ever deterred. And often, God knows, it must have seemed that heaven itself was against him. I never tried to imagine his frustrations, but to achieve his aim, he must have had to overcome many obstacles. To ensure the success of such a passion, he must surely have battled with and overcome despair. One year he had planted more than 10,000 maples, every one of which had died. The following year he planted no more maples and returned to beech trees, which did even better than the oaks. To properly appreciate this man's extraordinary qualities, it must be remembered that he lived and worked in solitude. Solitude so complete that towards the end of his life, he lost the habit of speech. Or was it that he saw no need for it? In 1933, he was visited by a dumbfounded forester. This forester came to notify him of an order that lighting fires outdoors was forbidden for fear of endangering this natural forest. It was the first time, the man told him naively, that he had ever seen a forest grow of its own accord. It so happened that at this time Elzéar Bouffier was planting a new forest of beech trees 12 kilometers away from his home. To save himself the journeying back and forth, for he was then 75 years old, he had the idea of building a stone hut hard by the tree nurseries, and the following year he did so. In 1935, a whole delegation of authorities arrived to inspect the natural forest. A high-ranking official from the forestry department, one elected member of parliament, a few technical experts. There was a great deal of useless talk. It was decided something must be done, but happily, nobody did anything. Save for one useful thing, the forest was placed under government protection and charcoal burning was prohibited. You see, it was really quite impossible not to be enchanted by the beauty of these young, healthy trees. They had even cast their spell over the Member of Parliament.